Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Muy buenas tardes. We begin our final afternoon session on caring for creation, Pope Francis, and environmental stewardship with our prayer. Let us pray. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. God and Father of us all, in Jesus, your Son and our Savior, you have made us your sons and daughters in the family of the Church. May your grace and love help our families in every part of the world be united to one another in fidelity to the gospel. May the example of the Holy Family, with the aid of your Holy Spirit, guide all families, especially those most troubled, to be homes of communion and prayer, and to always seek your truth and live in your love. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. It's now my pleasure to introduce Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia, who is President of the Pontifical Council for the Family, who will himself introduce this afternoon's distinguished guest. Archbishop Paglia.
We are ready for the President of the Republic of Panama and Cardinal Turkson. But I would like to explain you why I decided to have in this international meeting this exposition about the encyclical of the Pope Francis. I would like to thank the Cardinal Turkson, President of Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, for the assistance that he gave to the Pope in the preparation of the encyclical Laudato Si. And I also thank the President of the Republic of Panama, Varela, for having agreed to present this encyclical at this World Meeting of Families. It was my thought that two important figures, one from the Church, the other of a statesman, would be of great help to us in understanding the importance of this masterful document. It is the first time that a Pope has addressed in such a broad fashion the question of ecology, and the encyclical deals with the family in a very profound way, while it is true that the encyclical speaks of the family explicitly only in its paragraph 213. The entire document is based on a concept that cannot find their full development without the family. Let me start by saying something about paragraph 213. In a few lines, Pope Francis shines a spotlight on the importance of the family's role in teaching us a new lifestyle that respects ecology. He writes, and I quote, "I want to emphasize the central role of the family, where we develop habits of love and concern for life. For example, how we use materials goods, how we respect neatness and cleanliness, how we are aware of our own local ecosystem, and An applause to the President, the Cardinal. We are at home, and when important people come, we say to them our joy to welcome. So I was quoting a passage of the Pope about the encyclical Laudato Si, the 213 paragraph, when the Pope says the family is where personal formation and personal maturation take place. In the family, we learn to say please and not be overbearing, to say thank you as an expression of sincere appreciation for what we have received, and to say I'm sorry when we do something wrong. These small gestures of sincere courtesy help build a culture of shared life and respect for all that surrounds us. Finish the quotation. These lines are few, but our life can be built on them. They are enough to be the basis for the education of millions and millions of children every day and in diverse environments in which we live. I might say in synthesis that the conversion to ecology the Pope Francis asks of all does not involve only governments, bureaucrats, economists, corporate executives, and the rest. It touches as well the members of all the families of the world. Families must embark on a new way of life, one less addicted to endless consumption and more committed to a more modest way of living that respects human existence itself and of all creation as well. I need go further now, but I know you understand how important it is that we speak of it during this World Meeting of Families. Another point that I would like to mention is one that runs through the entire encyclical and touches the vocation and mission of the family. I'm referring to the biblical passage that speaks of creation. The writer, after having told of the creation of heaven and earth, of the sun and the moon, of trees and animals, talks about the creation of man and woman. Yes, God, after having prepared a very special dwelling place, He gives it to the family as their home. In this way, He shows us the relationship that may exist between creation and the family. And it is important to reflect on that which God said to the man and the woman. It shows clearly what creation really means. God gave two commandments to the family. Care for creation, do not dominate, and still less spoil it. Make it continue to be a home for all the human family. Adam and Eve stand for all humanity. The earth does not belong to this person or that. It belongs to God, who has entrusted it to the human family, to all the human family, not to any group, not to any generation, but to all generations, for each one of them to care for it and make it beautiful. And then, second, God said to this first family and to all that follow that we must furnish that home, not leave it empty and desolate. This is the clear story of the generations, and it gives a definitive description of the family. Dear friends, I'll stop here, but I emphasize that we must reflect more fully on the fact that God has entrusted creation to the human family and to each family in it. We must discover the great vocation of the family that affects all of society and all the world. We are far from thinking that a family is allowed to exist only of itself, that I am alone to care only for my own little garden, my own little concerns. The Lord has entrusted to families the great dream of making the world a beautiful home for all. This is the perspective that the encyclical opened for us. And because of that, we can truly say, praise to you, my Lord, for our sister Earth and for our families. Thank you, and the door to our guests.
Seminent Cardinal Peter Turkson, Seminent Archbishop Paglia, Seminent Archbishop Michael Mueller, Su Excelencia José Domingo Ulloa, Arzobispo de Panamá, delegates from our country, special guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the World Meeting of the Family Congress, especially Archbishop Paglia, for this invitation and for giving me the honor of introducing Cardinal Peter Turkson, President of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, in this season titled Caring for Creation, Pope Francis and Environmental Stewardship. Thanks to the opportunity given to me by the Panamanian people, I feel very honored to be here today, and with humbleness, I will put forward my best effort to fulfill Pope Francis' vision set forth in his apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, where he asked God to, open quotes, give us more politicians capable of sincere and effective dialogue aimed at healing the deepest roots and not simply the appearances of the evils in our world. That politics often denigrated, remains a lofty vocation and one of the highest forms of charity, inasmuch as it seeks the common good. It is precisely the search for the common good that led me to enter into public life, based on my Jesuit education and the search for social justice that Jesuits planted deep inside my soul. All men and women in public life must follow their faith. We must work harder and push incessantly so that politics are understood as a public service, especially in favor of the most vulnerable, fragile, and in need. In his encyclical, Laudato Si, Pope Francis showed us a path which we all are called to follow. He stresses the importance of our common home, of the fundamental right to clean drinking water, the importance of proper solid waste disposal, the promotion of sustainable fishing, the protection of water basins and reforestation, the preservation of mangrove forests, green areas, and public spaces for the families, as well as the access to decent housing, and efficient public healthcare and transportation systems. He calls us to serve and also tells us that whoever would be great among us must be a servant, that we must above all protect mankind from self-destruction, but first and foremost, that all it takes is just one good person to restore hope. For that reason, as I see the thousands gathered here in Philadelphia, all the Catholic families that are part of this Congress, it serves as a clear reminder that there is hope for better days, that the visit of the Holy Father and this meeting of the families will leave a message in the core of American society, a message of faith, unity, and commitment to others. We must rebuild our society, starting with our families, our communities, spreading the message that love conquers all. To quote His Holiness Pope Francis' words, we are one single human family, and there are no barriers or frontiers. As the world suffers the devastating effects of climate change, it is key to make sure that environmental education is taught in our schools, in our homes, and to our citizens, so we can prepare our next generations to protect our planet. Our countries have the most advanced and modern educational institutions, but the most important education is the one we receive in the core of our families, because it can lead us to become great human beings. What we learn in school can shape us into great professionals. Both educations combined create a perfect balance of men and women prepared to serve the world. That is the slogan of the high school where I received my high school education by the Jesuits. Men and women at the service of faith and promotion of justice. The Jesuit education instilled in me a social sensibility that led me to participate in public life, and that today it has brought me to this gathering here in Philadelphia. I hope that the moments we will share in this Congress of the families, the lectures, the conference we will be listening to, the declarations, and the Holy Mass that will take place during the weekend will serve us as a nourishment for our souls, to keep the faith, to stay strong in our belief that the world can be a fair place, that we can make the world better, always using our God-given talents in service of others, starting in our communities. The Catholic Church, with its universal presence and with our faith in the Creator, not only does a great social service to the world, not only establishes moral codes that allows for dignified human coexistence, but it also gives us hope in God, in us, in the noble causes for which we struggle together, causes that may allow us to earn the trust of our citizens and lead them in search of the common good and social peace within and between our countries. Now, let's prepare ourselves to listen to His Eminence, Cardinal Peter Turkson, Archbishop Emeritus of Cape Coast and President of the Vatican Council of Justice and Peace. He was ordained priest in 1975, appointed Archbishop in 1993, appointed Cardinal in 2003 by Pope St. John Paul II, and designated by Pope Francis to introduce his encyclical Laudato Si. Who better than him to share with us this encyclical about the taking care of our common home? Thank you for your attention.
So, Your Eminences, Your Excellencies, my Lord Archbishops and Bishops, and all of you, my brothers and sisters, I wish to thank heartily His Excellency the President of Panama for his words of introduction and for essentially the way he introduced the vocation of political leadership, which he himself exercises and which he enjoins all of us to appreciate. And if, just to drop a hint, our own dicastery is in the process of preparing a small booklet on the vocation to political leadership. So we'll probably get a forward from you. Then I'd like to thank the Pontifical Council for the Family and the Archdiocese of Philadelphia for this invitation to share a few thoughts on this encyclical with you. So, quickly to begin and try to respect time, I have a small thing here to help me. So, let me begin with the title of the new encyclical, launched 3 months ago. What the world anticipated, in a way, was kind of a policy statement on great environmental difficulties and how to confront these difficulties. Indeed, the encyclical, according to its subtitle, is all about the care for our common home, so the care for creation. It salutes the home, the place where the family nurtures life, and where individuals become family. And so Laudato Si does not treat the environment as a separate background or a mere resource for human life. The environment is part of us, according to this encyclical, and we are also part of the environment. And that's how the Holy Father refers to Pope Francis as St. Francis with his hymn of creation, where he refers to the earth, the moon, and everything as brother and sister. So the earth then provides our common home for the entire human family, and we did that a particular home also for each individual family. So this afternoon, we'll just be talking about two families. Our families, the families that we are and which is gathered here, and the family of humanity, the family of humankind, which has the earth for its home. So according to Laudato Si, what it stands to do is to contribute to the Church's social teaching about the environment and about the human person. So it is social in perspective and scope. It is not scientific, it is not economic treatise, nor does it seek to advance any technological explanation of any of the processes of the earth. If, since you're here, if you venture into the hall where they're selling books, you find this small booklet by the U.S. American Bishops Conference and what it says about climate change. And the way it introduces the scientific part is that as Catholic bishops, we make no independent judgment on the plausibility of global warming. Rather, we accept the consensus finding of so many scientists and the conclusions of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change set up by the United Nations as a basis for continued research and prudent action. So that's a very prudent and very prudential note. Nevertheless, coming on my journey here in flight, I picked up US Today to read. And US Today has an article on the summer sizzling to the hottest on record worldwide. So summer sizzles to the hottest on record worldwide. And he goes on to then say that the month of June, July, and August were the planet's hottest on record. So the U.S. Bishops' Conference, very modest and invite us to be prudent, but we have observations like this also drawing our attention to how things are also changing around us. And I'm sure that if I were to take you through all of this, and if there was time, you have a lot of positions that will still dispute what the U.S. today has said. And so the argument on whether there is really global warming or climate change is an ongoing debate and discussion. But as the Bishops' Conference of the United States says, going by the consensus agreement fashion on the issue, there is need and there's reason to be cautious and to be prudent about our treatment of our common home. And so, according to the encyclical then, these other perspectives need to be taken care of very seriously because the environment is just part of us and we are part of it. It provides one common home for the entire human family and within it a particular home for each family. And so the moral import of ecology and economy for the family is undeniable. And having a home has much to do with a sense of personal dignity and growth of families. In our days, the family can easily suffer a double danger. Families may face economic vulnerability due to insufficient salary and even joblessness or insecurity or dangers at work. And most horribly, in our supposedly modern world, even trafficking of human persons and slavery. But families may also face ecological vulnerability in the guise of hunger, malnutrition, insufficient access to water, precarious environmental conditions, wastelands, and degradation, deforestation of all sorts. And so the Holy Father is attuned to all of these threats, and he aggressively chastises those who indulge in unbridled greed and throwaway culture that threaten our common home for all of our human families. But he also points positively to the family as an essential element of finding a better path, a solution. This culminates in his reference to the Holy Family and to St. Joseph, who can inspire us to work with generosity and tenderness in protecting this world which God has entrusted into our care. And so to stimulate our discussion this afternoon, let me recall some main insights of Laudato Si and offer suggestions for our reflection on the family. So first, how does this encyclical then talk about the family? The vision of Laudato Si is extremely broad and very inclusive. It will help us, for example, or it will invite us to look at the humanity is not separate from the environment in which we live. Rather, humanity and the natural environment are united inextricably. Secondly, the accelerating change in climate is undeniable. Catastrophic and worsened by human activities, again, which is very disputed, still questioned by several authors and scientists, but also amenable to human intervention. Then the grave errors that increase our disastrous indifference to the environment include a throwaway culture of consumerism and a naive confidence that technological advancement can fix everything that happens on this earth. Then there is also the need for an ethical nature, to consider the ethical nature of our crisis. This must be addressed both through dialogue and by recovering our fundamental spiritual dimension. And so, when we talk about fundamental spiritual dimensions, if you pick up the encyclical to read, you will notice that on the basis of this, the Holy Father calls for dialogue between the different religious groups to discover precisely such a spiritual dimension to the climate change issue or the environmental crisis. So, Pope Francis then would have us address a few basic key questions. So the key question then is, what kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us, to children who are now growing up? This is a basic fundamental question that the Holy Father addresses to us, and it becomes the inspiring concern with which he goes through all of this encyclical. The Holy Father his embrace of the multi-generational human family resonates very strongly, not only with me because I'm an African and because of the African belief in ancestors and the connection between them, but even over here in the traditional cultures of Indians who also used to live on this land. So I sense the pain then in his words when Pope Francis laments the consequences for children whose families are forced to migrate after local animals and plants have disappeared due to changes in climate. This, according to Pope Francis, in turn affects the livelihood of the poor, who are then forced to leave their homes with great uncertainty for their future and that of their children. So what anguish we should feel that thousands of plants and animal species are lost every year, so our children will not get a chance to see them anymore. So deeply concerned, the Holy Father is also very critical of parents then, who selfishly waste resources on what is not really needed, reducing their children's chances of building lives of their own later on. And more broadly, he holds everyone alive now accountable for leaving debris, desolation, and filth to future generations. In fact, continuing from the biblical reflection that Monsignor Palia began to share with you, God created two things, and only two things did God create. God created the human person and the earth, the universe, as his home. But not simply as a home. The Bible refers to this home of humanity as a garden. That is how the Bible presents the world given to us as a home. It's a garden. And the one big concern that we should all have is that if God entrusted a garden into our hands, that we should make sure that we do not bequeath a wilderness to those who come after us. For that is very easy for us to do. And a garden, as you also know, is a place that you take care of. You lend attention, you care, you cultivate. you water, you spend care and attention on it. Wilderness has abandonment, indifference, and so it grows wild. What we want to pass on is a garden and not a wilderness. Accordingly, the Holy Father then would have us consider our difficulty in taking up this challenge seriously, which has to do with an ethical and cultural decline, which has accompanied the deterioration of the environment. And he says men and women of our postmodern world run the risk of rampant individualism, and many problems of society are connected with today's self-centered culture of instant gratification. And so we see this in the crisis of family and social ties and difficulties of recognizing the other person. So parents, according to Pope Francis, can be prone to impulsive and wasteful consumption, which then affects their children, who find it increasingly difficult to acquire a home of their own and build a family of their own. And so furthermore, for Pope Francis, he would have us then commit to not only to keep the poor of the future in mind, but also today's poor. We should not only be thinking intergenerationally, thinking about those who will come after us, but even those we live with now. So not only about the poor of the future, but the poor now, whose lives on earth is brief and who cannot keep waiting. Therefore, in addition to a fairer sense of intergenerational solidarity, there is also the need, an urgent moral need, for a renewed sense of intragenerational solidarity. So two solidarities: intergenerational from one to the other, present, future, and intragenerational, so those with whom we constitute the human family on the face of the earth now. So note then the link of the Holy Father between descendants and neighbors. Our inability to think seriously about future generations, according to Pope Francis, is linked to our inability to broaden the scope of our present interests and to give consideration to those who remain excluded from development. So he ties this in with a throwaway culture and a sense of indifference, which not only allows the sexual exploitation of children, but also the abandonment of the elderly shut up in homes from the eyes and the attention of people in society, because nobody cares about them anymore. And he then asks the question, is it not the same relativistic logic which justifies buying the organs of poor for resale or abandoning elderly people in deplorable conditions in homes and developing a culture of the excluded? If then, according to Pope Francis, if we want to leave a wonderful world to our grandchildren and children, we'd better then start thinking right now about our neighbor, about our neighbor's neighbor. And in today's world, there is therefore, and there should be no room for what is represented this day in some literatures as 0 degree of separation. This diagram over here is by one social scientist who believes that everybody can find connected to somebody within 6 degrees of extension. That when one begins to discover relationship, within 6 degrees of extension, one can find his interconnectedness to or people that he probably didn't think he was ever connected to. We go to the second part now, concretely bringing this encyclical home to this meeting here. The family as the locus of caring. Care is central to the encyclical of the Holy Father. And this is very important. We could illustrate this several ways, but we'll go on quickly to it. You may recall that at his first Mass, after his election as a Pope, Pope Francis in the Mass referred to St. Joseph as a custodian, and from that developed the sense of Joseph the custodian inspires in all of us also custody for creation and everything that God has made. So that ties in with an expression which has been regularly used about our sense of stewardship of creation and our custody of the earth. When we come to this encyclical, Laudato Si', the word custody or stewardship is used only twice. The Holy Father, Pope Francis, prefers to talk about care, as if there is a difference between care and stewardship. And indeed there is. When one takes a steward of something entrusted to him, he can be passive, and he cannot be emotionally or passionately connected. But when one cares for something, there's a lot of passion in it. There's a lot of commitment, and one does it with his heart. So in this encyclical, the Holy Father prefers to talk about care rather than stewardship or custody of creation. If one cares, one is connected. The intimate family is where people care for and about each other, and this ongoing, evolving experience should, in turn, ripple out to care throughout the human family. And so, as we go on with this, commentators then have noticed a simple elegance in the style of Laudato Si', and even a childlike quality to its language. This, in a way, is true. And so, for instance, people have observed that there's a similarities between important points in the encyclical and the insights of popular children's books. One of them is what we try to draw attention to here. There is a popular book, probably known in North America, as All I Really Need to Know, I Learned in Kindergarten. There is a book with this title, All I Really Needed to Know, I Learned in Kindergarten. And their sage advice is that the early lessons we learn as children should be recuperated in adulthood, and indeed in social life. Such lessons include what you read out there: sharing, being kind, cleaning up after ourselves, all things in moderation, and making time to wonder about things around us. So care, as it were, begins in family. We care about our children, and we care for our children, so much so that parents will sacrifice enormously, even their own lives, to ensure the safety and the flourishing of their children. Remember the beautiful lesson of the Little Prince? The fox teaches the boy that the flower has meaning in relation to his care. And with caring, the hard line between self and the other begins to soften and begins to crumble. With care, it's easier to fashion relationships and to discover the beauty and the sense of interconnectedness and interrelationship. So when we cast aside anything precious in the world, we destroy part of ourselves and our families too, because we are completely connected. This helps to explain why the church promotes the greatest respect for human life, from conception to natural death. For destruction of human life at any stage violates the absolutely fundamental human dignity upon which all human life and responsibilities rest. And so let me repeat the words of Pope Francis. What kind of world would we really wish to live for future generations who come after us? Thinking about the need and the world of children now and yet to be born is also the index of justice. The common good is not just horizontal, but the common good is also vertical. Indeed, as I had mentioned a little bit before, here in North America, indigenous Indians insist on thinking about themselves in terms of 7 generations. While some may thinking about everything in terms of 7 generations as eliminating creativity and innovativeness, it is a way of also ensuring that our interconnectedness and intergenerational solidarity is very solid, and it coincides and matches with our intergenerational solidarity. And so, gathered here for this meeting of the family, the encyclical also reminds us that our relationships are not based only on contracts, because we can't get out of contract at will. The encyclical also introduced the sense of a covenant as a form of a relationship also first between God and us, and between us and between one another. Covenant is what the encyclical presents to us as the basis and terms of all relationship that we should establish. Not contracts, not something we get in and get out at will, but something that we get in and we hold. And when our relationships are governed by covenant, then we repair the relationship when it is broken. We mend it. Through reconciliation, we try to patch up again. And that's when the Holy Father talks about, in several of his catecheses during the Wednesday audience, about husbands learning to say, I'm sorry to wives, and wives learning to say, I'm sorry to their husband, because relationship based on covenant requires reparation. And for us as Christians and Catholics, this should not be difficult. It is important to recognize that our relationship with God, though presented sometimes in terms of righteousness, is also presented as justification. And when we talk about being reconciled with God as having been justified, then the only meaning of that is that we are rendered just again to be in relationship. Justification is the way that we are rendered just again to be in relationship. And that is the type of relationship that the covenant fashions between us. So this is what the encyclical invites us to do, to build our relationship not only on contract, but also on covenants on account of their living character. And so, I see a yellow light here, so I'll rush a little bit. So, what can families do? Families then can do a lot. For example, this is one thing that Bishop Palia talked about, a passage that he quoted. Pope Francis talks in this encyclical about good education. That plants the seed when we're young, and these continue to bear fruit throughout life. So here, though, I will stress the great importance of the family, which is the place in which life, the gift of God, can be properly welcomed, can be protected, and can be nurtured and cultivated. So what can the families do? A lot of things. Before talking about the small little things that all of us can do to deal with the present climate and global warming situation, the Holy Father presents the image of St. Teresa of the Child Jesus as the saint of little things. And presenting the saint of little things, the Holy Father then goes through this to show us that with little things, we can all deal and contribute to the solution of the problem. Avoid the use of plastic and paper waste, reduce water consumption, sort out waste of different kinds, cook only what is reasonable. So all of this somebody may consider to banal or whatever, but that's the Holy Father's turn. He has taught us that reality is far better than ideas, and he gives us a whole lot of these as an example. And if you want to key this in, global warming is about release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But we also know there is one thing that also eats carbon from the atmosphere, and that is green material planted. So it's also been suggested that if all households will go back to cultivating small household gardens, we would all have patches of green, which will contribute to eating and absorbing carbon from the atmosphere as a way of solving the famous global warming, which we are trying to deal with. And finally, there is an observation that the Holy Father also makes, inviting us to go from family to family, that there is a lesson that the global human family can transmit to the small domestic family, and there's what the small domestic family can also do to enhance the global family. And so he says that in our Christian tradition, the story of humanity begins with family, with God creating Eve as a companion for Adam, and with Adam and Eve going into the world of struggle to work and to bear children. And as we meet here in Philadelphia, a city which means the love of brothers, we recall that the first family had its first problem among brotherhood. It's as if the book of Genesis is suggesting to us that the grammar for human coexistence is brotherhood and fraternity. But the first challenge also to human family is the rejection of brotherhood. And that took place when Cain killed his brother Abel. So fratricide then becomes the first rejection of the grammar that God presented as the basis of human coexistence and human society. So our salvation history then also begins with family. It begins with the Holy Family, with the birth of Jesus to Mary and Joseph in Bethlehem, and with their desperately taking refuge in Egypt, with their family life in Nazareth, and with the drama of a temporary separation when Jesus stays back in the temple in Jerusalem, and from what Jesus learned in family, reaching out in his own ministry to heal the sons of widows and to touch the very many prodigal sons and all. So we have the family setting of creation corresponding and pointing to the family setting of our salvation. And so later on, theologians and scripture experts will say, where evil came from, salvation and redemption is written from there. So the family at the beginning of creation corresponds to the family through which Jesus, Joseph and Mary constitute, and then through which our own salvation is effected. So then, by way of concluding, not waiting for the red light yet, let me say that Laudato Si has us look at family with fresh eyes. Let us allow ourselves to be startled and to appreciate family as the birthplace of each one of us and as the birthplace of all humanity. God created a human family according to a grammar and according to a logic, which is that of brotherhood and that of fraternity. And to recognize then that the loss of each one or the murder of each one becomes fratricide. And this sense is important. The murder of each one is a fratricide. It's a brother killing a brother, because basically a human family and brothers is what we are. So from the intimate family, let us build towards the broad family of all humanity now and in the future. What will make us the people we were born and called to be, according to Pope Francis, is our connectedness to one another and our willingness to sacrifice for our children and our children's children that will ever walk on the world This is indeed the full family, fully alive. And as I said, God gave us a garden for our home. Let us not bequeath a wilderness to those who come after us. And may God bless you at this seminar. Okay.